Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, Hindus and Sikhs in Pakistan join together to investigate a case of beadbi, or sacrilege. In India, has Modi realised he's pushed his minorities just a little bit too far as he launches a new initiative to reach out to the nation's Muslims ahead of Eid? Meanwhile, in Texas, several religions joined together to condemn the decision to force schools to display the Christian Ten Commandments. And we have the gloriously entertaining interview of the New Zealand Prime Minister as one of Godi's media sweethearts fights unsuccessfully to get him to condemn the Khalistan movement. All this and more on today's show. But joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. Thanks for all of your great comments. We'll cover those at the end of the show, but don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks for tuning in again. Back to you, Angus.
Absolutely. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And indeed, stay tuned to the end of the show for a run through some of your comments. So keep an eye out for those. Right, James, let's get underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, there seems to be a very big event happening that could be historical and precedent-setting, and that is that Pakistan has formed a joint Hindu-Sikh committee to investigate the sin of sacrilege. Now, this is a big deal because it is taken extremely serious, any form of sacrilege within the borders of Pakistan. And we've seen where people have actually died as a result of actions, and riots have broken out in the past, just even as recently as last year. So this has become a big issue, and this committee and investigation is looking to try and calm the waters, so to speak, in between the Hindus and the Sikhs, and try to eliminate a lot of the sacrilege that's going on between the two. Now, this particular incident has been announced, and that it's an unprecedented move. A joint committee comprising members of both the Hindu and the Sikh communities have been established in Pakistan to investigate an alleged incident of sacrilege in the Sindh province. Now, this marks the first time such an interfaith collaboration has occurred in the country to address the religious grievances. The formation of the six-member committee follows a meeting in Lahore between representatives of the Pakistan Hindu Mandir Management Committee, also known as the PHMMC, and the Pakistan Sikh Gurdwara Parbandak Committee, because I'm bad for the pronunciation. The meeting was convened to address tensions arising from the incident that reportedly took place on March the 25th, and that happened in Sheikhpur city. Now, according to reports, a Hindu preacher by the name of Sagar Kumar allegedly distorted the Gurbani, the sacred scripture of Sikhism, or of Sikhi. Replacing the name of Baba Guru Nanak with that of Narayan Bhajan, a saint of the Udasi Panth. A video of the incident went viral, sparking strong condemnation from the Sikh community, and this again has brought together the real concerns on both sides about sacrilege and about the growing unrest between the communities in a way to try and calm it and to move things forward in a better harmonious living situation between the faith and between each faith. Now, Kishan Sharma, chairman of the PHMMC, stated that the meeting aimed to prevent the escalation of tensions between the two minority communities. The PSGPC president, Ramesh Kumar, who serves as the Minority Affairs Minister of Punjab Province in Pakistan, confirmed that the distortion of the Gurbani was discussed and all attendees expressed solidarity with the Sikh community. Now, the newly formed investigation committee includes 3 members from each the PHMMC and the PSGPC. Keel Das Kastani, the Minister of State for Religious Affairs and Interfaith Harmony, has been appointed the chairman of this committee. Now, the statement here was that we will conduct an investigation into the case, but the priority is to de-escalate the situation, diffuse tensions, and prevent religious sentiments from being further inflamed. And that was Krishan Sharma that stated that. Well, Sagar Kumar has reportedly apologized for his actions in social media videos. Some Sikh leaders were considering filing a first information report, which again, for those outside of India unfamiliar with that term, is essentially a police report, the initial report to the police or to authorities, and that would be a criminal charge against him under Pakistani Sacrilege Act. The joint initiative comes against a backdrop of concerns regarding the rights and security of religious minorities in Pakistan, where allegations of sacrilege are highly sensitive. The outcome of the investigation could set a significant precedent for how such incidents are handled in the future. And we know that this is also a concern within India between various groups as well. So I think that this is great leadership to try and find new paths forward for both communities and ways in which to try and break down some of the tension between the different groups, Angus.
Indeed, and it's interesting, of course, when a religion is in a minority, how differently it acts as opposed to being in the majority. And of course, I'm talking about the contrast between Pakistan and India here. And of course, the majority of Hindus just want to live quite peacefully and amicably along with their fellow human beings. It is only when they get whipped up by leaders who leverage their religious dominance that things start to go awry. And I think this in Pakistan is a wonderful example of, again, of just how ordinary Hindus can actually act like decent human beings, because, of course, the majority of them are decent human beings. And we keep saying we're not anti-Hindu on this channel, we're very pro-Hindu. It's just when the extremists get involved, it all starts going very wrong. And I think this story actually is actually a very nice story, because it does demonstrate that, as I say, ordinary Hindus, when they are in the minority, it brings out the best in them, and they are assisting their fellow human beings, the Sikhs, across in Sindh province to investigate this. Now, Pakistan is an interesting country in terms of its sort of history and its religion. It is, of course, predominantly a Muslim country. It's 96 point something percent Muslim. Sunni Muslims is what happened post-partition, 1947. And of course, the religious minorities are less than 4% of the population. And the Sikh population is very, very small, and surprisingly, it was of course absolutely denuded, is an understatement, post-partition, and it really serves all these minority communities to work together when something goes wrong. And generally speaking, the minority religions in Pakistan have actually had, I would say, a fairly reasonable time since partition. Of course, there have been tensions, but the predominantly Muslim government and Muslim population have treated their minorities actually with generally speaking a good deal of respect. I travelled around Pakistan in the 1980s, and I'd met many Sikhs. I travelled around the Punjab, actually, Pakistan Punjab, in the 1980s, and the sense of peace and calm in the area. There was certainly no inter-community tensions that I ever sensed. I was welcomed in by people actually of all religions, primarily Muslims, of course, but I did meet many Sikhs, turban Sikhs at the time. And I remember I left with very, very positive memories. So I think my takeaway from this story, James, is things clearly, as they were in the 1980s, is that despite, yes, of course, there are always going to be sad incidents of sacrilege and things. There are always going to be extremists who spoil things for the majority of people. But I think the fact that the Hindus in Pakistan have joined together with their Sikh counterparts to investigate an action like this, I think speaks volumes about the goodness of humanity in general.
Absolutely. And it really shows that, when you look from the outside, sometimes we get our opinions, they're skewed by, all of the media. And unfortunately, it's usually the negative or the violence or different things like that make the international media. And this is a good story where communities are coming together to find solutions and to find a harmonious connection there, especially considering that they are both minorities in Pakistan and they need to stick together in terms of making a better future for both groups. And I think that you stated it very well, Angus, in the fact that, yes, They may be different in many ways, but again, they've come together to find the common ground, and they're moving forward in a great way that can offer leadership to the rest of the world. And it's only when the extremists get involved that you really see a lot of tension or problems in the area. And that's no different than what we saw here in Canada last year with the different protests going on at the Gurdwaras and the temples and the mandirs. And a lot of that had to do with the extremists, and so it's great to see that they can act as a conduit and a leadership to try and change the direction of how they deal with each other and deal with the issues that come up. So again, great job to all of those involved, and we'll keep you up to date on the findings of the committee and solutions that come out of it, of course, because that's going to be the most important part of that. Now, as we look at different minorities, we're going to take a look from the other side of the border there in India. And the BJP there has launched the SIGN Modi initiative, a nationwide minority outreach. Now, this is ahead of religious holiday by the Muslims, and then they are going to be reaching out as well over Easter to the Christians and others, as well as planned events during Vaisakhi. Now, essentially what's happening is that the BJP is utilizing various levels of government and different government staff to go out and hand out these kits that involve or that include things like rice and cloth for clothing, or even outfits, stuff like this. And it is a way that Modi is claiming to reach out to the minorities and try to make some pathway to healing and reconciliation with the minorities. Well, the opposition is basically referring to it as a big bribe to try and get votes, as there is a vote coming up in the near future, and it's actually this fall, but at the same time it's going to take some time for him to try and make some inroads with the minorities of the country. Now, the BJP has aimed to distribute 3.2 million of these curated kits through a network of 32,000 party workers, engaging with local mosques to identify each economically weaker section of the community. And again, as I said, they will be going on to do this at Easter and during Vaisakhi, as well as other ways to reach out to minorities. The kits include essential food items, as I said, like soya, sugar, dry fruit, gram flour, and suji, vermicelli, milk packets, and along with the clothing, as I said. And this, again, each package is estimated to be worth 500 to 600 rupees, which in US dollars would be about $5.50 to $7 per kit. And that essentially is an average day to a day and a half's worth of salary in India. So it doesn't seem like much to the Western world, but to some who are in, we'll say, more impoverished communities or settings, that could make a big difference to get through the week. Now, the initiative was officially launched with events in cities like Mumbai and Delhi, where BJP leaders, including the National General Secretary, Mr. Govt, participated in distributing the kits. The BJP Minority Morcha National President, Jamal Siddiqui, the key figure behind the program, emphasized that the initiative aligns with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Sabka Sath and Sabka Vikas, together with all development for all philosophy, and aims to strengthen the bonds between the BJP and the minority communities. Now, of course, the opposite side is just calling it, not a goodwill gesture. They are actually looking at it as a bribe, trying to get votes coming up this November, and I believe it's October or November where the local votes happen. So the SIGN Modi campaign's scale, with its aim to distribute 3.2 million kits nationwide, underscores the significant resources the BJP is investing in its outreach. The collaboration with local religious institutions like mosques, gurdwaras, and churches is intended to ensure the kits reach intended beneficiaries and foster trust within these communities. So again, we'll watch and see what other little tricks that Modi and the BJP have up their sleeve. Angus, with the vote in the fall, I'm sure there's still a lot more to come that they'll be arguing over from both sides of the fence.
Oh, indeed. I mean, I will never condemn an act of charity or an act of goodness. And on the face of it, it does seem to be a nice outreach program that is designed to help the lives, albeit in a very small way, of the minority Islamic population. So, yeah, it does, on the face of it, appear to be at least an effort by the Modi government to reach out to this minority. But unfortunately, of course, politicians never do anything without a reason. They never do it out of the goodness of the heart, let's be honest. And as our audience know, that our general opinion of politicians is really not very high, unfortunately, based on life experience. I mean, prove me wrong, you know. And unfortunately, and of course, as leaders and members of the opposition have pointed out across the Indian media, look, this is it's a pretty cynical effort just to garner some votes ahead of the Bihar elections. And and the reality is, you've got to outweigh, if you put this on a balance of scales of one positive act, put on the other side all the negative acts that the BJP government have done against not just the Muslim population, but all its minorities, but certainly against the Muslim population. And those scales are deeply unbalanced. Of course, there's been all sorts of actions, whether overt or subvert, that the BJP government have had. I'll give you one. I'll just throw one example of that, and that's that there was a recent policy where restaurants and cafes have to display the proprietor's name over the door or publicly, so that customers can see who owns that restaurant. And of course, the Muslim population and many critics came out and said, look, you're immediately discriminating against primarily the Muslim population there, because of course it means that Hindus can therefore identify which are the Muslim restaurants and therefore avoid them. And that just created an inherent discrimination, just in something as basic as that. So there's all these policies which are designed to divide and separate and discriminate against the minorities. So little acts of kindness, supposed kindness, like sending out these parcels, really are deeply outweighed by the more deeply dangerous policies, James. And I think we have to see this in the context of that. And of course, as the opposition have pointed out, you've also got to see it in the context of, look, this is just a plain and simple good old political bribe. We see it here in the West. We have similar actions where governments do very similar sort of types of on the face of it, charitable efforts towards a certain demographic, but ultimately underneath it, it has a very clear agenda, that is just to win votes. And I suspect, James, sadly, as nice as this act is, it really is just there just to garner votes ahead of that election.
Yeah, and let's face it, Angus, the 1 day salary, so to speak, equivalent is not going to make a big difference in their lives long term, where they could have used that money to try and find some other initiatives that'll give some long term benefit, as opposed to just, handing out bags to groups of people.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on then, and let's move just into Delhi itself, and I have to thank a couple of our commenters for highlighting this one and sending me the link to this. This, of course, is this wonderful interview with the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Christopher Luxon. Now, Prime Minister Luxon was in India recently, over recent days. He was on a 5-day state visit to see, of course, Narendra Modi and the Indian government to have various bilateral talks about many issues. Of course, New Zealand, a relatively small country, but it does, of course, occupy that Asia-Pacific region. India is an important potential ally for New Zealand. So, of course, it is quite a significant meeting for the Prime Minister. So he had to tread very, very carefully and very diplomatically. Firstly, obviously not to upset India in any way, shape or form, but also to build bridges and build ties. So it was quite an important mission that he was on there. Now, as part of that mission, one of the Gaudy media sweethearts, as I referred to, a lady called Palki Sharma, she is one of the senior journalists for First Post. And they do have a YouTube channel, and they of course do broadcast in India. She interviewed Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, and the interview, she had 20 minutes and she covered a huge range of topics. There's a lot to cover in 20 minutes and a lot of big topics. And they did talk about many things. They talked about Donald Trump at great length. They talked about the US administration and its current impact on global affairs, of course, the tariffs, etc. They even talked about subjects like Elon Musk. China entered the equation to a large extent, and of course trade and commerce was a very big topic of conversation. And then of course just just the general cooperation between New Zealand and its alignment with, or India's and New Zealand's potential alignment as allies, and then the regional geopolitics. And it even managed to cover, they spent 2 minutes discussing more, should we say, more of a light-hearted question. Of course, Prime Minister Luxon was the former CEO of Air New Zealand, and he's ended up as running the country. So the final question that Ms. Sharma asked him was, which did you prefer? And what's the difference? And how are you finding it? So it was a bit of a sort of jollity at the end. But of course, in amongst all that, Ms. Sharma asked Christopher Luxon about Khalistan, and she was determined to get Prime Minister Luxon to condemn the Khalistan movement. And I'm going to play this. Watch this for its massive entertainment value. Here you go.
Prime Minister Luxon, you've said in the past that, and I'm quoting again, India is very much aligned with New Zealand on security and defence. And New Delhi has raised concerns in the recent past vis-a-vis the Khalistani separatists that operate in New Zealand. And last year, they also held a referendum that talked about breaking up the state of Punjab from India. The government of India, of course, objected to it. How do you propose to address these concerns?
Well, the bottom line is that in our democracy, we believe in the freedom of speech. We have very clear, we expect that speech to be legal, compliant, and we have police that actually enforce our law and make sure that law is being upheld. So from our point of view, we expect people to be able to voice protest. We just want it done legally, and they are entitled to do so under freedom of speech, as you would expect in a good liberal democracy. But it's also important that the law is upheld and maintained, and where we see that is not the case, obviously our police over a number of decades have continued to enforce those laws, and so and make sure that it is legal and it is appropriate. But that's what I expressed very strongly to Prime Minister Modi, and what I've said publicly and privately.
If the Al-Qaeda or the ISIS were to hold a referendum, if organizations like the Al-Qaeda or ISIS were to hold a referendum in New Zealand about something related to one of your Western partners, would you say the same?
Well, again, the key thing for us is that we have very well-defined laws in our democracy around the freedom of speech, and we expect people to be compliant with those laws, that they have a complete right to protest, but they have to do so in a way that is legal. And when it's not the case, that's when our police, we have huge respect for, that do an excellent job in New Zealand of enforcing our laws. It's important that they're upheld, and so it's as simple as that for us. It's very much a case of we expect people to exercise their protest. They're entitled to do so in a democracy. That's important, but equally we expect that actually they are compliant with our laws at any point in time.
Sikhs for Justice is a banned terrorist organization according to the government of India, and it operates in New Zealand as the leader of a country that is exploring a deeper partnership with India. Are you willing to be open to these concerns from New Delhi on acting against groups which India perceives as threats? Well,
I've heard the broad perspective of the Indian government around that particular issue. But as I keep coming back to you to say, as a sovereign, as a democracy that respects sovereign borders and sovereign nation states, we have strong laws in our system to protect free speech, but also to ensure that free speech is compliant with our legal system. And that's what, as a New Zealand Prime Minister, that's what I want to make sure we uphold in our society. And so we'll continue to, we as I said, we really are proud of free speech, but we also expect free speech that comes with some responsibilities, and that is to make sure that it's fully compliant with our legal framework as well.
You went to a Gurudwara with Prime Minister Modi yesterday. Did you have conversations with the Indian leadership on this particular point, on the Khalistan issue?
It was expressed to me in a general sense about, we talked about terrorism in general. It was obviously a perspective from the Indian government that was raised with me as well around how they view this separatist movement across the world and what they've observed. But again, as I said privately, as I said publicly, we are a liberal democracy. The laws of New Zealand are what I enforce. We expect people to have free speech, but we expect them to be compliant with that law.
I understand, but no specific conversation on Khalistan on this visit, is what you're saying?
I understand the Indian position at a broad sense, but there was no specific, nothing specific from a New Zealand point of view. It was raised with me as a general issue,
okay,
as you heard the Prime Minister say yesterday, but I also raised back our position around free speech and people being compliant with our law.
I can only summarise that as just a case of don't come to us, a liberal, mature democracy, with your joke version of democracy and try and dictate to how we run freedom of speech and the rule of law and democracy. That basically, you can sum up all those questions with that. And I have to make a quick shout out to our Khalistani campaigners and our Khalistani audience in New Zealand. I know there are one or two watching. So a good day to you guys. And there's a lot to take away from this interview, and unfortunately we don't have time to really pick it apart. But basically, he's just said, look, I'm sorry, we do not recognise the Khalistan issue and certainly Sikhs for Justice as terrorist organisations. In your country, you, for whatever reasons, have designated them as terrorists. Under our rule of law, under our government, under all our laws and our democracy, we do not recognise it as a terrorist organisation. There is no evidence. In other words, you provide the evidence, we reconsider it. But there is no evidence that anybody to do with the Khalistan movement in New Zealand is a terrorist or is breaking any law. They are just expressing their freedom of religion, freedom of expression. It's as simple as that. What I did find really quite offensive, but this again just really demonstrates the desperation of India, and by Palki Sharma, you've got to essentially just use her as a representative of the Modi government. Is that the Modi government are the question there? If ISIS held a referendum in New Zealand, would you respect their right to hold that referendum? So what she's doing there is she's equating Sikhs for Justice and the Khalistan movement with ISIS. ISIS is a designated terrorist organisation globally, because they act on a regular basis, blowing people up. They kill people on a regular basis. They created a whole war in the Middle East through their actions. So you're trying to equate the Khalistan movement with ISIS. That is the level of argument that they're coming up with. This is why India is losing the argument. This is why India has lost any credibility globally, is because they are so desperate to try and damage and destroy the movement that they're trying to equate it with the likes of ISIS, which again is just absolutely risible. Likewise, Sikhs for Justice, she's saying, look, Sikhs for Justice is a terrorist organisation. The Prime Minister, Luxon, just says they're just expressing their democratic freedom of speech. If they break any law, yes, we will arrest them. They have broken no law, therefore they are not terrorists. And again, India just will not get this message, and they've tried so hard, whether with the Trump administration, whether with Trudeau, whether in New Zealand, they are desperate to try and get all these Western governments to condemn the Khalistan movements as terrorists, and they are all standing up and saying, no, they are not terrorists, they are expressing their democratic free will. That's what it's really all about. Now, the real takeaway from me for this, and this is a really, really positive point, apart from the fact the interview was just deeply entertaining, the fact is that interview lasted 20 minutes. 4 minutes of that interview, that is 20% of that interview, was dedicated to Khalistan. An interview where every minute is precious for this news outlet. They covered every topic under the sun, including really big important topics like global geopolitics, like Trump, etc. Yet 20% of that interview was dedicated to Khalistan. What does that mean? That just demonstrates how terrified India is of Khalistan. It also demonstrates the Khalistan movement is winning. This is the real takeaway. It might seem a small point, this, but this is yet more evidence. The Khalistan argument, the Khalistan movement is winning the war. It is winning battle after battle. And this is demonstrated by the fact in this really important interview with the Prime Minister of a major democratic nation, 20% of that interview was dedicated to Khalistan. Now, Khalistan, in theory, should be a small issue. It's a peripheral issue. No, it's not. This demonstrates how dangerous this movement has become for Modi's government. They're realising they're losing. So they are fighting tooth and nail. They are desperate to claw back the narrative, desperate to try and turn the narrative against Khalistan, but they're losing. They're seeing the success of the referendum. They are seeing how many hundreds of thousands and now millions of Sikhs are joining the Khalistan movement. They've seen it in the Punjab domestically. They're trying everything they can to bury it and suppress it and destroy it in the Punjab, but they're failing. See Amrit Pal Singh's election to the Lok Sabha as evidence of that. And then in the diaspora, the referendum has been proven over and over again to be attracting a massive level of support from the whole Sikh diaspora. So they are losing the argument. The Khalistan movement is reaching new highs. It is reaching an enormous level of momentum. The argument is being won, and it comes down to simple democratic arguments, the rule of law. James, I'm delighted to say that this very simple interview and the dedication to the whole Khalistan discussion just proves the Khalistan argument is being won, and that Khalistan is now inevitable.
Absolutely, Angus. And much like you pointed out there, I found it fascinating that they really wanted to push, in terms of the interviewer, she really wanted to push their narrative and the BJP narrative. And he would have none of it. He brought up, or clearly stated that he spoke with the high-ups there. He spoke with Modi and others in the government, and they tried to push the narrative of Sikhs for Justice being a terrorist organization. And he just plainly said that, if they bring evidence and that there's actually something more than a freedom of speech issue, then we'll look at it. But other than that, it's just they are very clearly only exercising their freedom of speech and their right to the democratic vote. I mean, it's, just ridiculous that they tried to continue to push it for that 4 minutes. It just was a non-starter with this leader.
And it's the same in Canada. It just reflects exactly the same thing that happened in Canada. Is that Trudeau, when confronted by India saying all these Khalistan campaigners are terrorists, show us the evidence. India submitted the evidence, Canada looked at the evidence and just threw it out, said, there is no evidence. These people are not terrorists. Likewise in the United States, same thing with Sikhs for Justice. India provided all sorts of alleged evidence, again, thrown out by the United States. In other words, the Khalistan movement is nothing to do with terrorism. It is a simple democratic movement, and that is winning that argument basically because of that. So thanks to our commenters who pointed us to that interview. As I say, it was a fabulous metaphorical democratic slap in the face to Modi's, I keep calling it Godi, the Godi media, to the Modi government, saying, no, this is how you run a democracy. Your version of democracy in India under the BJP is just not winning the argument. So, James, let's move on to, should we say, slightly more serious matters in Texas, United States. And
if she really wanted to get him angered and get a clip of him getting frustrated, she just had to bring up rugby and say that the Khalistan team was beating New Zealand. That would have got the blood going about rugby, but not about Khalistan.
Don't get me on that subject. I've got my own views about the All Blacks and our interesting relationship we've had with the All Blacks for many years. But let's quickly move on.
Exactly.
And as I say, a big shout out to our viewers in New Zealand. Good day, guys, and well done to all your campaigning down there. Right, James. Yes, Texas in the United States. This is quite a serious story, actually, and the southern states of the United States have always been very powerfully religious, let's say, and the Christian faith obviously has a very strong platform in the southern states. And Texas, this has manifested itself recently, where the Texas administration, shall we say, are now trying to bring in a new piece of state legislation to install in every K-12 public school the obligation to display a government-selected version of the Ten Commandments in every classroom. Now, this, of course, is a Christian thing. The Ten Commandments that occurred in the Bible. I'll have to blow the dust off my religious teachings. And it was Moses, the Ten Commandments. Basically, they are 10 commandments of how you must behave morally. And they include things like I must not murder people, to put it very basically. But basically, they are the 10 moral commandments of how to behave in a normal society. But they are inherently linked to Christianity. And of course, now that they are being obliged to be displayed in every K-12 public school in Texas, of course, a large group of faith leaders across various faiths in Texas said, hang on a second, you can't do this. This is just not right. And they've joined together to vote against this, what is termed the SB 10 HB 1009 bill that is bringing this in. And 166 faith leaders from across the state have said in a statement, the responsibility for religious education belongs to families, houses of worship and other religious institutions, not the government. The government oversteps its authority when it dictates an official state-approved version of any religious text. And I'm just going to play you just a quick video of Senator Nathan Johnson, who spoke quite vehemently about this.
Both the U.S. and Texas constitutions guarantee our right, and the right of all Texans, to religious freedom. That freedom involves respecting the rights of individuals, parents, and faith communities to make decisions about the teaching of sacred texts that inform our religious understandings and practices. Bills mandating the display of the Ten Commandments demean that freedom. The responsibility for religious education belongs to families, houses of worship, and other religious institutions, not the government. The government oversteps its authority when it dictates an official state-approved version of any religious text. Our faith communities exist to help individuals and families live according to their beliefs. We do not need or want government officials interfering with and usurping this sacred role.
And so the story, there's lots of different offshoots of this story, but basically, to summarise it, the faith leaders from all these different groups have just said, look, this argument really, what it boils down to is who is responsible for religious education? Should it be imposed by a government, or should it be really up to families and their own social context to educate them and bring them up into whatever religion? Again, it's all about freedom. And again, I'm interested in our audience's opinion on this because, of course, many countries like India, for example, are secular nations. France is a prime example of this, where France is a secular nation, and they are very, very brutal about this, where schools must not display any evidence of any religious bias, any association with any religion. This is, of course, where Islam has a big issue in France because they want to wear the burqas and the various adornments of being a Muslim. But France is absolutely black and white. No, we are secular. The school system is absolutely secular. There must be no demonstration or association with any religion whatsoever. Here in the UK, slightly different. We are, we were, let's say, a primarily Christian country. And certainly most schools here in the UK quite often have a morning assembly where sometimes a Christian hymn is sung. Less so these days, but certainly historically that was very traditional. So again, it was very traditional as a Christian-dominated country that the government, I wouldn't say obliged. Actually, I think I may be wrong. I think there was some level of obligation that in most public schools there will be some level of Christian worship, whether that's through a hymn or a prayer or whatever. But that's the other side of the coin that's worked here. But in the US here, certainly in Texas, the argument is saying, look, no. We're supposed to be secular. We do not want the government to oblige and impose one religion upon school children, where, of course, they're very easily influenced. So, James, I think this is an interesting argument, and I think you can argue both sides of the coin here perfectly validly. But certainly the Sikh community have joined with the other leaders here to say, no, you must not impose Christianity, in this case, upon our children. It must be secular. The children must be educated at home or by their places of worship, the gurdwaras or the temples or the mosques, whatever it happens to be. It's up to that. It's up to outside school to get that level of education. It must not be imposed upon children within the schools, James. That's a difficult argument.
Absolutely, Angus. My theory is quite strong on this. And I remember when I was little, we actually did, at the start of every class, we did the Lord's Prayer, and we also sang the national anthem. That is long gone, those days. And even when I was in school, it was phased out and eliminated. But, when you look at the separation of church and state, this is a very important issue. And I don't believe that the commandments should be in the classrooms. I think that crosses a line. And it also is counter to the Constitution of the United States. If they want to start looking at breaking the Constitution, how about they start with getting guns out of schools instead of religion into it? That's my theory for the U.S. And when you look at the fact that if they want religion in schools, there are options for that. There are private Christian schools, Catholic schools, Khalsa schools, Muslim schools. The parents have that option to enroll their children into the private schools or the religious schools. It does not belong in the public school system. And with that, I also think that it goes even further, because I also don't believe that they should have Black Lives Matter flags. They shouldn't have pride flags or any other special interest flags in the schools. Again, it's all about the subconscious attempt for them to feel superior when it comes to putting these commandments in the schools, and it's not fair to people who worship other faiths. And as I said, special interest groups and that, I just don't believe it. I think that any flag that's on government property or school property, which is still in fact government, should be the official flags of the municipality or city, the state, or the federal level. They should be government flags only, not special interest, and I don't believe that bringing religion into the classroom is acceptable either. There are much bigger issues that need to be dealt with in the school system to improve grades, to improve student retention of information, and to deal with, all of the failing grades that are happening. And I think that this is a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. And as I stated, it crosses the line of, combining church and state, which was put into place to keep that separation many years ago, Angus.
Absolutely, and I think I can totally agree with you on that. And certainly schools in this situation should be completely impartial, because young minds are so easily influenced, and they must be able to form their own opinions based on a broad and equal level of education. And contrast this, of course, to the very successful campaign that the Sikh community have achieved in the United States, and that is to ensure that Sikhi is included in the curriculum. And of course, this curriculum isn't imposing any one religion. It's actually educating the children about what every religion represents, what it is. And in fact, we have that certainly here in the UK, the curriculum now. It wasn't when I was young, but now the curriculum now includes a deliberate education, taking all the main religions of the world and explaining to the children, this is what this religion represents, this is what that religion represents. And then the children themselves then get this completely impartial, unbiased, unprejudiced view of all the religions. But ultimately, in their domestic environment, with their families, they of course may be practicing one specific religion, but that is up to the families to do that. And as you rightly say, it must be separated, and schools must be a completely impartial place of learning where children are taught a completely unbiased view of every subject, whether it's religion or whatever, so the children can, as they grow, can then form their own opinions, James. So anyway, on that note, let's move on under the pressure of time as usual. Let's move on to our comments section. And again, loads of great comments from our audience. Thank you to our audience, as always, for your wonderful comments. And we'll start the day off today with Hap B, one of our regulars. Sikhs have long been telling the truth about oppressive and terrorist Indian government. But, as you rightly say, what the Sikh community are up against is absolutely enormous. They are up against this enormous machine of the Indian government, of the ruling elite, who of course control the media, they control the police, they control the military. India does indeed have all the power and resources, which it unashamedly uses against Sikhs, and it has done pretty much since 1947, James. Unfortunately, the Sikh community are up against an enormously powerful machine. But they are prevailing despite the genocides that happened in the 1980s, despite the ongoing and the continuing oppression and persecution. The Sikh backbone is absolutely solid, as it always has been. And this is why, again, I think the Indian government are running so terrified of the Sikh community, is because they realise this Sikh backbone will not bend no matter what the Indian government throw at them.
Absolutely. And I think that it is also a strong testament of the resilience, but also the ingenuity of the Sikh community, the way that they can build businesses and really build resources amongst a, considerably small community based, when you compare that to the government resources of India. And what they've accomplished, I mean, it's like David versus Goliath in a sense. And yeah, I think that Khalistan will succeed basically because of the resilience and the dedication of those fighting for Khalistan.
Absolutely, and everybody loves to support an underdog, and in this story, the Sikh community is the underdog, and the message to the Sikh community is take heart, because despite this enormous machine of the Indian government that you've been up against for so long, you're still there, and you're still winning the argument, and this is why, really, it is a testament to the power of Sikhi in the community, and why it will prevail, because it doesn't matter what India throws at it. The community is still standing tall, whether domestically or across the diaspora. So, take heart. This argument will be won, indeed. Now, Sukhwant says, refers to this, we actually had the anniversary, the 5th anniversary, just a few days ago. This dreadful bombing in Kabul, 46 or thereabouts were killed in a bomb. Now, there's been all sorts of conspiracy theories about where the bomber was from, but according to Sukhwant, the bomber was from India. He travelled through Afghanistan from Delhi to cause that bomb. I'd refer you to my regular podcast with Bhagwan Singh Binder, who we talk a lot about these sorts of events, and this bombing certainly came up in that. But again, we talk about the persecution of the Sikhs, and certainly this is just another manifestation of actually what we've just been talking about, of the Indian state doing everything, sinking to every level to try and destroy the Sikh community. And we do know the extremists use proxy lunatics, let's call them what they are, whether they're suicide bombers or criminals, they're using these people to attack the Sikh community whatever way they can, and of course geographically wherever they can, here in Afghanistan, James.
Absolutely. And we need to look at, many other conspiracies that have happened, many other mass deaths that have happened. And of course, we know that a lot are potentially linked to the government of India. But to bring that evidence forward is very tough because, of course, they have the power to quash the investigations, to quash the evidence, and to try and bring it forward is a very difficult challenge, no matter how many people speak out and try to demand justice. I mean, we're still seeing people that are being, walking around enjoying their lives that were involved in the genocides in the 80s, Angus. So.
Indeed, and Avtar Dhillon refers, of course, to that glorious day on Sunday in Los Angeles with the referendum. And Avtar Dhillon says the Sikh army was out in force yesterday. Absolutely it was. An interesting use of the word army there, because it is an army, but the key word, as you say, very peaceful demonstrations. And that is what it's all about. It is all about peaceful, democratic demonstrations. It is an army in terms of its size and its power, but in terms of its operations, it is peaceful. It is fighting this war peacefully by the rule of law and by democratic norms, James, and that is why it's winning.
Absolutely, and it just goes back to reiterate the respect of the New Zealand government, saying no, they are taking part in peaceful process here.
And Danny, greetings to you, Danny, who's been very active as always on our comments column. And thanks, Danny, for all your contributions. And Danny, of course, sits on the opposing side of the narrative, but is never afraid to wade in quite robustly with various questions and arguments and counter arguments. And Danny, there was quite a lot of threads about these particular comments, but Danny did raise something that we talk about quite regularly. And yes, of course, referring to Los Angeles, you say 35,000, 50,000 here and there, etc., etc. The numbers are always in question. But as you say, it's 13,000 kilometres away from Punjab. Why are Punjabis not asking for their own referendum? They're even more vocal and fierce than Canadians. Well, absolutely they are. Well, Danny, as we often say, we know what happens when Sikhs in the Punjab try to campaign for Khalistan. They get locked up. And we've told you this before, Danny. I don't understand why we need to keep reminding you. If you campaign for Khalistan, secessionism in India is a criminal offence. It is illegal to campaign for Khalistan. And what happens to anybody who stands up for Khalistan, on the best of it, they go to prison. On the worst of it, they get quietly murdered. That's what happens to Punjabi Sikhs who campaign for Khalistan in the Punjab. So that's why, Danny. And then you rightly say, look, why don't the Sikhs confront Modi, not diplomatically trying to resolve things? Yeah, absolutely. Now, that is a very reasonable expectation and a reasonable question. Look, why don't the Sikh community confront Modi and try and negotiate and discuss it? Well, unfortunately, they tried this. This has been tried since 1947 and, in fact, before. Is that I only need to refer to the Anandpur Resolution of 1973 or 74, whenever it was, in the 1970s. Again, this was a prime example of where the Sikh community addressed all their issues to the Indian government, at the time it was Indira Gandhi, and said, look, we want autonomy, we want more say over our administration, we want basic human rights, we want the rights of access to our waters, to our rivers, to irrigate our crops, which you are currently denying us. So this was a peaceful negotiation presented to Indira Gandhi, who threw it away out of hand, and then was followed by Operation Blue Star a few years later. That's why, Danny, that's what's happened in the history of the Sikh community in the Punjab. They've tried this. They've been down this road 100 times. They just get rebuffed. They get completely refused. And this is why the movement in the 1980s happened, is because they weren't just ignored. They then started being physically oppressed. And that's why, Danny, that unfortunately it's just not worked. And you rightly say, would it not help farmers bargain in a better position? Again, they tried that in the 2019s and 2018. Their position was refused again by the Indian government, by the BJP government. So that's why there were the protests in 2020. They had to literally take to the streets in protest because they were not being listened to. And what happened then? Well, eventually, after a huge support for the protests, the BJP government capitulated and agreed, say, okay, yeah, we will give you some of these rights. What happened? They reneged on those promises again. That's why we had the protest last year and the ongoing protests again. So that's why we tried to negotiate. It's failed. And as you say, trying to use a third party, again, a good question. Why don't we just try and find somebody to arbitrate? Yeah, maybe, James, that's the way down this. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what the Sikh community tries to negotiate peacefully. There's a very clear agenda, James. The Indian government will never accept the Sikh community, will never give the Sikh community autonomy or any power of any description. They just hate the Sikh community because they see it as a threat to their governance of India.
Absolutely. And in case you're not aware, Danny, our show is actually banned in India as well, just for the simple fact that we talk about the Khalistan movement, we talk about the votes, the referendums, and the issues facing minorities in India. So just that in alone has our show banned in India. And we probably would be arrested if we stepped a foot on Indian soil, just for the simple fact that we bring the facts and the truth. And that is something that Narendra Modi and the BJP government and others consider to be a threat to their national unity there in India. So, and that's why the laws are so strict, is because they see that as a threat, again, to national unity. And that is another fear they have, is that if Khalistan was to break off and succeed, then they would have many other areas such as, Kashmir and others that would want to break off as well.
Indeed, and SIGN there was a lot of toing and froing between Danny and SIGN on various issues, but SIGN certainly stood up for the cause quite robustly as well, and said, look, and as well as I've just said it, whoever tries to raise the voice being killed or put into jail, etc., etc. So, but as you rightly sign off saying, but the truth prevails, James, and that really is how this argument will be won. And TC, our final set of comments. TC says, well done to Sikhs for Justice for standing up for UK and Sikh sovereignty, absolutely. And as you rightly say, referring to that story of the Gurdwara in Slough here in the UK that has come up against the British government and the Charity Commission for displaying a Khalistan plaque. And as you rightly say, TC, it's up to UK citizens what they put on their walls. This is you're absolutely right. It is a desperately outrageous imposition of state control to demand that a pro-Khalistan plaque is removed from the wall of a Gurdwara. They're using some pretty arcane and some pretty nefarious arguments to have it removed. But as you rightly say, TC, we have freedom of expression here in the UK, and we will stand up for their rights, as we will in any Western democracy. Will we not, James?
Absolutely. And let's not forget that the general membership of the Gurdwara, of course, if it was something offensive or something that the majority didn't agree with, it would be removed. But instead, that has been there for, decades. And it's not for somebody else to come from the outside and demand what they do inside of the Gurdwara and what their majority agrees with. It's not like the school issue in Texas, where that is public money, public funds, public facilities, and open to all faiths. So it's a big difference there. And yeah, they need to be able to make their own decisions.
Absolutely. And again, the positive side of that whole story is, once again, it demonstrates how terrified India is of Khalistan. It knows it's losing that argument if it's having to resort to trying to pressure the British government to remove a plaque from a Gurdwara wall in Slough. That's how desperate they're becoming. That's how terrified they are. So again, as I keep saying, really the community should take stock and take a huge amount of compliment from this. Is that it just shows how effective that campaigning has been. And on that subject, Sukhwinder Singh says the sovereignty and the freedom of Punjab is really what matters. And as Singh Dalasha gets the final word on the whole thing, and absolutely right, the referendum has had a tremendous response. The days are coming. Raj Karega Khalsa, Khalistan Zindabad, James. We have no doubt that Khalistan is coming.
And we're excited to be there when it does, Angus. We're excited to be there.
Absolutely. And on that wonderfully positive note, we will bring Perspectives to a close for another day. Thanks so much to all of you for all your comments. Do keep them coming in. And as I say, we do love the interesting and informative comments highlighting things that we may have missed or may not know about. So do keep those coming in, particularly historic events that when we have anniversaries, let us know those. Thanks to many of you who've emailed about all sorts of things, including, for example, the New Zealand interview. We love stuff like that. So do point us in the direction of things like that if you come across those. Just send us a message either in the comments or send us a direct message at message@satlogetv.com. But in the meantime, that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It's a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.